Hadid Carpet Cleaning Traffic Center.
On the outer loop of the Beltway, we've got traffic jammed from Annapolis Road to get around a crash that's blocking the two left lanes and shoulder right before you get to the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. Between Germantown and Gaithersburg, you're still going to find only one lane open on Clapper Road. You'll be guided through the back up there with a flagger at each end. I'm Ed Rodriguez, and now from GarageDoorRepair.com, here's the WMAL EVC 7 Storm Watch forecast.
Clear skies going down to 57 overnight. Mostly sunny tomorrow, high near 90.
Your phone has a lot of apps, but how many of them help you make sense of your world?
The new WMAL app gives you the latest headlines, perspective from the voices you trust, and weather info to keep you in the know.
All without having to remember yet another password.
Yeah, I'm all right with that. See your favorite shows.
Get the day's top headlines.
And access our podcast archives.
All with the new WMAL app.
Thank you. Get the WMAL app today on Google Play or the Apple App Store. And stay connected.
It's ready for Patrick Nichols and his team of roofing experts at New Look Home Design. Listen, when you hire someone to replace your roof, you don't just want any company. You want New Look, the roofing experts. New Look has done work at my home, and Meredith and I, we've been thrilled with it. With over 40,000 roofs installed for happy homeowners, you know they have the experience you can count on. New Look offers same-day on-site or virtual estimates. They provide a 3D rendering of your home, and every estimate includes line-by-line pricing, so you know exactly what you're paying for. Plus, every New Look roof comes with a lifetime warranty. Even better news, now through August 31st, New Look is offering 50% off all roofing materials. Plus, no payments, no interest financing for 12 months. That's right. You get your new roof now, you make no payments for a full year. If you need a new roof or you're just exploring your options, take my advice. Call New Look Home Design, the roofing experts. 800-279-5300 or visit newlookhomedesign.com.
For all your glass, mirror, and shower door needs, visit DullasGlass.com. Dullas Glass, love your glass.
On News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
Ben Shapiro.
Hey, welcome to the Ben Shapiro Show. The show is sponsored by ExpressVPN. It's time to stand up against big tech. Protect your data. ExpressVPN.com/Ben Shapiro. Well, yesterday, Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the last leader of the Soviet Union before its collapse, died at the age of 91, and the media have been just feeding him. I mean, we're talking the obituaries that would normally be due to a figure like, say, Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King Jr. They're being piled on Mikhail Gorbachev. The reason for that is because Mikhail Gorbachev, again, basically made two decisions. One was a giant mistake, and the other deserves some plaudits for. The giant mistake was believing that he could allow cracks in the facade of the Soviet Union without the entire system collapsing underneath him. And the thing that he deserves plaudits for is not starting a nuclear war at the very end of the Soviet Union's existence. Those were basically the two things that he did. And the media instead are treating him as sort of an ideological hero, as though he quote-unquote ended the Cold War. Mikhail Gorbachev, by himself, would not have ended the Cold War. Mikhail Gorbachev was a communist. Mikhail Gorbachev is and was a Leninist. If you read everything that he ever wrote, he's a devotee of Marxism. He never stopped being a devotee of Marxism. All that happened in the latter days of Mikhail Gorbachev is that he suddenly recognized that the Soviet Union was too weak to actually prop up this vast sphere of empire, and he started to essentially allow people to make their own decisions without full-on military intervention. But that was actually a late development. In 1986, 1985, 1986, by the time Mikhail Gorbachev actually took over, his early moves were actually quite repressive. The notion that Mikhail Gorbachev was a humanitarian in some way is not the case. And it seems to me that one of the reasons the media are massaging Mikhail Gorbachev's legacy here after his death is because, and this happened at the time, they don't want to give credit to the actual heroes of the anti-communist movement. People like Margaret Thatcher, people like Ronald Reagan, people like Pope John Paul II. They don't want to give credit to the actual anti-communists who fought communism each and every day. Instead, they would prefer to believe that the Soviet Union sort of was always quasi-good-hearted, and at the very end, their heart showed through when they saw that the empire could not survive. They simply allowed it to collapse out of the decency and warmth of their own heart. And you can see that in the coverage from CNN and the New York Times. Here's CNN's obituary for Mikhail Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the former Soviet Union from 1985 until 1991, has died at the age of 91. Gorbachev died after a long illness, Russian state news agencies reported. Apparently, the man credited with introducing key political and economic reforms to the USSR and helping to end the Cold War had been in failing health for some time. Again, when we say that he helped to end the Cold War, what we mean is that he read the writing on the wall, and then he he made the mistake of allowing cracks to appear in a very, very weak facade, and the entire thing fell away. The lesson, by the way, that was learned by the Chinese from watching Mikhail Gorbachev is never, ever allow political liberalization before economic liberalization. So what the Chinese have done is they've strengthened their state apparatus while also getting involved in mercantilism via the free market. Gorbachev sort of did the reverse. He allowed for political liberalization, at least in very, very small part, in the ring of states that surrounded the actual Russian Empire. And then, after that, economic liberalization took place. So allowing any sort of political break is what led to the fall of the Soviet Union. The only way, however, he could have held that off would have been on the basis of a stronger economy, and the economy simply did not exist in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was always a bit of a paper tiger, not in the sense that they weren't militarily powerful, they were, but in the sense that they were retrograde economically. And if you actually wish to have a powerful and durable empire for a long period of time, meaning more than 70 years, then what you're going to need to do is actually build up the economy. Communism actually forbids that, which is why China has been able to strengthen itself on the basis of capitalism, and now I think China actually is going to enter a period of economic stagnation that's going to weaken them over the course of the next couple of generations. In any case, the obituaries have been absolutely fawning about Mikhail Gorbachev. According to CNN, with his outgoing, charismatic nature, Gorbachev broke the mold for Soviet leaders who until then had been mostly remote, icy figures. Almost from the start of his leadership, he strove for significant reforms, so the system would work more efficiently and more democratically. Hence the two key phrases of the Gorbachev era: glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. Well, I mean, he really did not have much of a choice, given the fact that the Soviet Union was already on its heels in Afghanistan, given the fact that the Soviet Union was being dramatically outpaced by the United States, both militarily and economically speaking. He later said, "I began these reforms, and my guiding stars were freedom and democracy without bloodshed, so that people would cease to be a herd led by a shepherd, they would become citizens." Now, that's a bit of revisionist history, but CNN goes right along with it. According to CNN, Gorbachev had humble beginnings. He was born into a peasant family March 2nd, 1931, near the Stavropol, and as a boy, he did farm labor along with his studies, working with his father, who was a combine harvest operator. In later life, Gorbachev said he was particularly proud of my ability to detect a fault in the combine instantly just by the sound of it. He became a member of the Communist Party in 1952. He completed a law degree at Moscow University in 1955, and that's when he got married. During the early 1960s, he became head of the agriculture department for the Stavropol region. By the end of the decade, he'd risen to the top of the party hierarchy in the region. Now, by the way, I should mention here that if you became the top of the party hierarchy in the 1960s in the Soviet Union, this is not because you were a wonderful person. This is because you were a both political ground-noser and you had the capacity for absolute brutality. Because the Communist Party in the Soviet Union is one of the worst institutions in the history of humanity. So if you rise to the top of that, it's not because you're a wonderful, open-minded fellow. As a general rule, he came to the attention of Mikhail Suslov and Yuri Andropov, members of the Politburo, the principal policy-setting body of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, according to CNN, got him elected to the Central Committee in 1971 and arranged 4 trips for their rising star. In 1978, he was back in Moscow. The next year, he was chosen as a candidate member of the Politburo. His stewardship of Soviet agriculture was not a success. As he came to realize the collective system was fundamentally flawed in more than one way, a full Politburo member since 1980, Gorbachev became more influential in 1982 when his mentor Andropov succeeded Leonid Brezhnev as general secretary of the party, and of course Andropov ended up dying prematurely. He was already pretty old by the time he took over. Gorbachev began to argue in favor of an end to the arms race with the West, hoping to shift resources to the civilian sector. I mean, bottom line is that, again, he was sitting on top of an incredibly rickety structure. During his 6 years in office, Gorbachev always seemed to be moving too fast for the party establishment and too slow for more radical reformers who hoped to do away with the one-party state and the command economy. Desperately trying to stay in control of the reform process, he seemed to have underestimated the depth of the economic crisis. He also seemed to have a blind spot for the power of the nationality issue. Glasnost created ever louder calls for independence from the Baltics and other Soviet republics in the late 1980s. He tried to engage in negotiations with Reagan, but it was Reagan who really drove the negotiations. Reagan actually sat down in 1986 in Reykjavik with Gorbachev, in which they were going to discuss getting rid of nuclear weapons altogether. And Gorbachev said, well, if you want to do that, then you also have to get rid of SDI, right, the Star Wars Initiative, which was going to be missile defense. And Reagan got up from the table and walked away. And later, Gorbachev was asked, why did that summit go the way that it did? He said, we never expected that Reagan would actually get up and say no. It was all meant as sort of a front for the calming down of the military waters for the propagation of the Soviet Union into the future. In other words, it wasn't that Gorbachev wanted to end the Soviet Union. I mean, he was being treated as some sort of an anti-communist reformer. That is not the case. He was a communist who completely misread the tea leaves when it came to the collapse of communism. And then, in a sort of reversal of history, he became the hero of the liberal reform movement, despite the fact that he actually was a pretty vicious communist. Natan Sharansky was held as an actual political prisoner in the Soviet Union for years, has a piece of the Washington Post about Mikhail Gorbachev. He says, what is perhaps surprising is that Gorbachev never achieved any sort of admiration. At home, we dissidents and others in the intelligentsia, those who did not believe in the regime, who want to change, who had even fought for decades for the very reforms Gorbachev introduced, held a more complicated view of the last Soviet leader. For one, he was a true believer in the ideas of Marx and Lenin, and the original intention behind his pioneering reforms was to rebrand communism with a more human face. Moreover, the moment it became clear that the people's desire for greater freedom could ultimately topple the regime, he did his best to restrain the forces he had unleashed. During his first trips to the West, before he became leader of the Politburo, Gorbachev discovered that the Soviet Union had paid a heavy diplomatic and economic price for its treatment of dissidents. As a result, within the first year of ascending to power, he began to release political prisoners and long-time refuseniks. Those are Jews who were attempting to get out of the Soviet Union and get to Israel. When it became clear that such a policy could lead to mass immigration, he introduced new restrictions instead. It was only after massive American pressure, including 250,000 demonstrators convening in Washington in 1987, that the Iron Curtain first began to come down and Gorbachev began to release people. Freer immigration from the USSR led to demands by religious and national groups for self-determination. Sharansky should know, because Sharansky was one of the political prisoners who was released. This too Gorbachev resisted. He sent troops to Georgia, Lithuania, and elsewhere. He killed dozens of demonstrators in the process. The dissident Andrei Sakharov, whom Gorbachev released in late 1986, and who initially appeared to be the leader's natural ally, spent the last years of his life actively fighting against Gorbachev's attempts to save the single-party system and to avoid competition in Soviet elections. Shortly before Sakharov died in 1989, he called me in Israel to say he could not visit as he had planned, since he would not permit himself to leave Moscow for even a single day, and potentially miss an opportunity to block Gorbachev's bid for unrivaled power. In other words, events outpaced Gorbachev. The obits for Gorbachev, again, because they're trying to deprive the actual heroes of the Cold War of their plaudits, the due plaudits. Again, I'm talking Reagan, I'm talking Thatcher, I'm talking John Paul II, I'm talking Lech Walesa, and all the Sakharov himself. The attempt to recast Gorbachev as a kinder, gentler communist, it may have been what Gorbachev wanted to be, a kinder, gentler communist. But here's the thing, it doesn't exist. He just missed the boat. And this is why the actual hardline communists hate Gorbachev. They think that if Gorbachev had actually just done the Stalin thing and marched tanks into these dissident republics, that the Soviet Union would still exist today. One of those people who believes that, by the way, is Vladimir Putin, who calls the downfall of the Soviet Union a geopolitical tragedy, the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the 20th century. A decade after the fall of the USSR, circumstances had changed, said Natan Sharansky, participating with Gorbachev at a conference in Poland. I was asked about the forces leading to the regime's demise. In my response, I discussed three factors: Sakharov and other dissidents who fought valiantly to keep the spark of freedom alive, Western politicians like Scoop Jackson, Ronald Reagan, and Thatcher, and finally, Gorbachev, who perceived the direction of history and responded accordingly. Immediately after finishing my talk, I approached Gorbachev to thank him for releasing me. I was surprised to discover he was almost offended by my remarks, saying, quote, I released you against all advice to the contrary and you listed me only in third place. While I sympathized with his reaction, at the time I felt it was more important to amplify voices of dissidents than to emphasize his role in the transition. If we look at the 20th century, however, from the bird's eye perspective of history, we see how unique Gorbachev was in nearly every